We can get started? Okay. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. All right. So we left off at section 13 in Surah Al-Baqarah. Just make sure everyone quiet who's going to be in the Musalla. Okay. We're at section 13 is where we left off. And before this, we were looking at the story about Prophet Sulaiman and saying that Prophet Sulaiman was not somebody who disbelieved or did any of this black magic stuff, but it was the other people who were doing this bad stuff. So it clarifies that Prophet Sulaiman was not doing that, but it says that that's what the Jews of Medina and other parts of Arabia, that's what they were following instead of following the Prophet. So on verse 104, we continue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقولوا راعنا وقولوا انظرنا واسمعوا. So he says, believers, do not say the word ra'ina. And ra'ina means listen to us. But say unzurna. Say look at us. Instead, wasma'u, and then listen properly. Listen and obey what the Prophet is telling you. So if you look at this verse, and you don't have any historical context, this is one of those verses that makes it very, very clear that you need some level of commentary and history in order to understand some verses in the Quran. Because if you just read the translation of this alone by itself, it won't make any sense. What difference does it make if you say the word, listen to us, or if you say the word look to us? In Arabic, they mean almost the same thing. The first one, ra'ina, it means like, excuse me. So people would go up to the Prophet and they would say, oh, Prophet Ra'ina, excuse me, can you pay attention to us? We're trying to ask you a question. And he said, don't say that. Say unzurna. Say, you know what, can you look at us and give us some attention because we want to ask you something. There's really not much difference between the two words. But if you look at the historical context and you understand what was actually going on at the time, what you're going to notice is that the word ra'ina could easily be manipulated and turned into a different word. And this is exactly what used to happen by the Jews in Medina. So they would go and they would manipulate some words. And I've explained this a little bit before. So we've seen this previously when they were supposed to say the word hitta, which means forgiveness, and they changed it to something else like hinta, right? And it meant like, give us wheat. Sometimes they would come and they're supposed to say, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. And they said, Assalamu alaikum, just cutting out the lam. So here, when you say ra'ina, means like listen to us or give us attention, what they would do is they would modify it and they would put ra'ina. Sounds so similar. It's like ra'ina, ra'ina. You could barely tell the difference, but ra'ina means our shepherd. It changes the whole meaning. So you would walk up and you would think that, they're saying the same thing that the Muslims would say, but they're making fun of him. Like, you are our shepherd. I mean, it's like the most insulting thing you could tell a prophet. So the Quran is telling them, the Muslims, stop doing that. You need to be wiser. You need to adjust your language. You need to adjust your vocabulary set to make sure that it cannot be used and manipulated by your enemies. And this is a very important lesson. If you think about it, if you look at modern political discourse today, sometimes we use words and you know that these could be easily twisted by your enemy. So what you should do, either define your terms very clearly or just switch the term and use it to something else, right? So this is a sign of wisdom when you eliminate the opportunity for somebody who hates you, somebody who is your enemy, to try to use something against you. And this is exactly what the principle is being mentioned over here. But then Allah is saying one more principle on top of that. He says, by the way, don't do this, but you can still call his attention. You can still ask the Prophet questions. That's perfectly fine. Just use the right word. But when you do ask him questions, and when he does answer you, listen carefully, and that means follow it too. Right? So like you have a responsibility to follow, not just to go around probing, asking questions and say, I wonder, what's your opinion on this? Oh, thanks for your opinion. I'm going to follow whatever I want. Some people do that. When they go to someone, they're not even interested in following whatever the answer is going to be. They're saying, I was just trying to figure out what you wanted to say. When it comes to the Prophet in particular, they're supposed to listen, they're supposed to obey and follow. وَلِلْكَافِرِينَ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. The rejectors will have a painful punishment. Why? Because these people are, not only are they rejecting the Prophet, but they're insulting and they're mocking the Prophet. It doesn't get any worse than that. Right? They're going to have a particularly painful punishment because of what they have been doing. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, oh, by the way, I want to mention one more point here. If you look at this verse, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So far, in Surah Al-Baqarah, this is the first time we're seeing the address to the believers. Always been addressed to the people of the book, and particularly the children of Israel up until now. But now we see that the Qur'an, the surah, is starting to address the believers. And if you remember what I told you, I think on the first or second week of class, was Surah Al-Baqarah is divided into two main sections. One of them is an address to the children of Israel, to Bani Israel, who were the previous Muslim community, previous Muslim Ummah. And then there's going to be the other half of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is an address to the current and at that time, the upcoming Muslim Ummah, what was going to become the Muslim Ummah. And it's very important because what's happening is we are now entering into the transition where one turns into the other. And the reason behind this, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but this old Muslim Ummah that had all the prophets sent to them, they were supposed to be the ones who were believing in only Allah. They were representing the true religion of Allah in the world to everybody else. Like, this is the way you're supposed to follow the true religion. These people now are going to be replaced as having that special privilege and that special position by this new Muslim Ummah. But what's happening now is for the first time, the Muslim Ummah is being addressed. And then you remember, Surah Al-Baqarah is a Medinan surah, meaning it was revealed after the migration of the Prophet to the city of Medina, from Mecca to Medina. And what happens is in the Meccan surahs, remember that 2/3 of the Quran was already revealed. You don't find verses like Ya ayyuhallazina amanu in the first 2/3 of the Quran that was revealed. You find an address to the entire world. Everyone needs to believe. O idolaters, qul ya ayyuhal kafirun, O disbelievers, addressed to so many different things, but you don't find the believers being addressed as a collective community like this. So why you find this address now, and this is being introduced now, remember Surah Al-Baqarah, the early verses, or many of the verses, most of them were early Medinan revelations. So what's happening now is that with the migration of the Muslims from Mecca to Medina, now they're beginning to establish an actual community because they have a whole town, whole city to themselves. So now the address changes, and now there's like a formation of this community within the city, whereas in Mecca, it was kind of sporadic. People were living separately. They weren't all just, living in one place. So now the mission of Islam during that time, historically, is taking on a completely different meaning, and you can see that in the address of Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, O you who believe. The next verse, ما يود الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب ولا المشركين أن ينزل عليكم من خير من ربكم. The disbelievers from the people of the book and from the idol worshippers, they do not want you, meaning you Muslims, to get any good from your Lord. Like, they don't want you to have a revelation or to have a prophet or to have any of these things. Why? Because there's this something in the heart where you want it for yourself. You don't want anyone else to have something like this. And there's ethnic, there's a racial aspect to it as well. The racial aspect is, even if you look at Christianity today, we say people of the book. The people of the book means Jews and Christians. Idol worshippers referring to all of them in Arabia, but particularly the Quraysh in Mecca who kicked the Muslims out. What you find here is that even the Christians today, like Christianity as practiced in most parts of the world, or the most powerful Christianity, is the European Christianity, where what you have is Jesus looks like a white guy, right? Doesn't look very Israelite. He was not a white European. Right? He didn't have those facial features, most likely. It's very, very unlikely that that's what he looked like. But there's this concept of these are the people in power, this is our ethnicity, and there's even like a very little care for Christians who are from minority countries or Palestinian Christians or something like that. So there's always an ethnic element that plays a role, not only in Judaism among the Jews, but also when it comes to the Christians as well, and also when it comes to the idol worshippers as well. The Quraysh are not like, you know what, us and the Persians, we equally worship idols. And you know, the people in Africa, the ones who have idols, we're all the same, man. We have like this brotherhood. We both worship idols together. No, there's no brotherhood. We're Arabs. The Arabs think they're superior. Persians think they're superior. There's racial elements to it. So here, Allah is pointing this out and saying, you know what, these other groups of people, they don't want any good thing to happen to you from Allah. They wish you didn't get a book, you didn't get the last revelation. They wish that the Prophet wouldn't come to you. They hope that the Prophet would come to them. And particularly, it's more focusing on the Jews in particular, but it left it open. And it's talking about the idol worshippers too. They don't want any good thing because that messes up their competition. One of the things that happened was in Mecca, one of the clans, they said, you know what, we'd be willing to, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ declared himself as a prophet, one of them got up and he's like, there's no way we could possibly accept you as a prophet. Even if we believe you were a prophet, we still can't accept you because we've been in clan rivalry with the Banu Hashim. You're from the Hashim clan. There's other clans out there, right? There's Umayyah clan and there's Makhzum clan. So many different clans out there. We can compete with you when it comes to charity. We'll try to be more charitable and get a good reputation. We can compete with you when it comes to bravery, courage. We can compete with you when it comes to poetry. We can compete with you when it comes to everything. But how in the world could we compete if we accepted you as a prophet? Like, you can't beat that. It's like if the prophet came from one clan, there's no matter how hard you try, you can't beat that. Because therefore, we can never accept you because there's an aspect of rivalry that's automatically built into the hearts of many people. It's hard for them to overcome that. So Allah is pointing this fact out. Wallahu yahtassu bi rahmatihi man yasha. There's one extra wow there. But Allah chooses for His mercy whomever He wants. So Allah is responding and saying, you know what? This message and this khayr, this goodness that we give, whether it's a revelation or a prophet or something, that's out of the mercy of Allah. And He's saying, we give out of our mercy good to whomever we want. It's not up to you. You can't be like, you know what? We don't want this good thing to come to you guys. It's not your choice. It's not in your control. Allah decides. And if Allah decides, who are you to question it? Exactly the same thing goes back to the story of Iblis, right? And Adam. Is that Iblis didn't like the fact that Adam was picked. And he gave all of his reasons and everything. But at the end of the day, his reasons don't matter. Allah picked him. And that's it. You have to accept that. So this is what Allah is describing this one more time. Wallahu dhul fadlil azim. Allah possesses infinite grace. Meaning Allah has so much to give that you can never exhaust it. He has so much good to give. He said He can give whichever good He wants. And by the way, Allah has so much good to give. He could give to everyone if He wanted to, but He has a wisdom. He has a way of giving according to His wisdom to one person in a particular time, another group of people in another time. So you have to put your trust in Allah and never think that there's some scarcity of resources. There's a reason why Allah chooses to give some special thing to one person and another special thing to another person, or withhold from another person. The next verse. ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها. Any verse that we replace or cause to be forgotten, we replace it with a better or a similar one. So Allah is mentioning this thing, and you're saying, well, wait a minute, what verse is it talking about? So it could be referring to one of two things, or both. Verse meaning a verse of the Qur'an, and verse also meaning a verse of the previous scriptures, or the previous scriptures as a whole. Because there's two things going on here. The first thing that's happening is that, remember, the address is to the people of the book. And the people of the book now are basically on the verge of being replaced by a new community because there's a new book. So if there's a new book, the Qur'an, say, well, what about the Injil? What about the Torah? And the Jews are saying, we have the Torah. And the Christians are saying, well, we have the Injil, we have the Gospels. So this new book that's coming, what about all the stuff that we have? And particularly when it comes to the Torah, there's going to be some rules in the Qur'an that override the previous rules that were coming in the Torah. Like, for example, details about what type of food you can eat, whether you can mix, meat and mix dairy, and the kosher standards and all of these things that developed over time. Many of those rules have been relaxed over time. And some things maybe have been increased and made stricter. So there's some rules overriding others. And it's like one revelation is kind of overriding another scripture, but not 100%, not entirely, but when it comes to some of the rules. And then there's another accusation, and that is in the Quran, there were some rules that were introduced, and then another verse would come, and that new verse would override the previous rule. So like, for example, when it came to drinking alcohol, right? Drinking alcohol in the Quran was prohibited in stages. In the first it says that alcohol is basically a bad thing. It wasn't prohibited. And then it says that drinking alcohol, if you drink and you're intoxicated, do not come near prayer if you're drunk. So some of the companions were still drinking at the time. And nobody should leave right now and be like, oh, got the rule. They're out of here. Then another verse came down, which clarified for everybody, for once and for all, that drinking alcohol is 100% prohibited. So somebody looked at verses like this, and they said, well, wait a minute. How can one verse override the other verse? Like, there's a rule, and it's a temporary rule, and then it changes. You say, well, why would that happen? Allah's knowledge is perfect. And one of the things was the Jews were complaining about this in Medina. Said Allah's knowledge is perfect. So why would you have this evolution of laws if Allah already knew exactly what to put from the beginning? Why is he changing his mind? And you have people ask this question even today. And the answer is pretty simple, is that there's nothing to be ashamed about when you have a temporary law that's been introduced, and then it's superseded by a universal permanent law. That's the way it happens even in society today. When government is trying to enact a new law, they'd be like, well, we're going to say that this new law is going into effect in 2 years, so everyone knows about it. And then after 2 years, it's going to evolve into another law, and we're going to make it a little bit stricter, and we're going to modify it. You say, well, why would you do something like that? It's not just based on new research or something. It's because there's a gradual implementation of laws. When you're trying to change a community that's been stuck for a while, you introduce something to them very gradually, and that makes sense. So when it comes to the different prayer rulings of the past that the Jews were doing, there was some modifications to the way it should be done now. Some of the rules for fasting that were there, some modifications. When it came to the amount of charity that they were giving, some modifications. And when it comes to the Quran as well, it introduced certain laws temporarily and then overrode them with a universal permanent law that everyone is supposed to follow afterwards. Because the revelation lasted for 23 years. It's very important to remember that. But it's also important to remember that there's never going to be a change in any belief in the Quran or in the previous scriptures. But it's not like Allah's going to say in the previous scriptures, that you should worship Jesus. And then the Quran, do not worship Jesus. It's not going to change. It's always been the same. Allah never said anything like that. And it's never going to change when it comes to the moral principles, what is generally right and wrong. But it's the manifestation of the moral principle within a particular time and space for a group of people that is what's going to be modified. And that's how law basically works. So this is the response that Allah gives, that you know what? Any verse that we replace, give another verse, or we cause to be forgotten, meaning the previous scriptures, people have been following it, they've been reciting it, you know what? Those people just start dying out, or people are trying to change the book, or it's gone. You don't need to know about it anymore. We replace it with something better or something similar, because Allah's in control. So he's like, whatever came is better, and it's better not because Allah needed to change his mind. It's better because the people have changed, and now they need this new rule or this new law. I'll remove the wow here too. أَلَمْ تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Don't you know that Allah has control over everything? Meaning, whoever's complaining about this rule, saying, well, why are there new verses? Why is one overriding the other? Don't you people who are objecting to this, don't you know Allah has control over everything? He can substitute anything. He can change anything he wants. There's no point of criticizing this. أَلَمْ تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Don't you know that only Allah knows, or only Allah owns the realm of the heavens and the earth? You see, Allah is in control of everything, so He can do everything. وَمَا لَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ مِن وَلِيٍّ وَلَا نَصِيرٍ. You do not have any other protector or helper besides Allah. So Allah is in control, and if you need help with anything, it's Allah who's going to do that. So follow the rules and the updated rules that Allah is giving you. أَمْ تُرِيدُونَ أَن تَسْأَلُوا رَسُولَكُمْ كَمَا سُئِلَ مُوسَى مِن قَبْلِ. Do you want to question your messenger like Musa was questioned before? Like questioned earlier in the past? So if you go back and you look what we've been covering in the story, so many times the people are coming and questioning Prophet Musa about the golden calf. They say, why do we have to do, about the, sorry, not the golden calf, about the cow. What kind of cow do we have to sacrifice? And what color is it going to be? And when he, says all these other things, about the food, he's like, you guys are getting better food. No, we're tired of this food. All of these complaints and questions and objections, it's saying the same thing. It's like, do you Muslims, or you people even among the Jews, you guys want to question your messenger? You want to do the same mistake that the people of Prophet Moses did? So you better not follow that. You already have an example. You've seen what they've done. Don't do that to your current prophet now. Don't do that to the Prophet Muhammad. وَمَن يَتَبَدَّلِ الْكُفْرَ بِالْإِيمَانِ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ سَوَاءَ السَّبِيلِ. Whoever trades belief for disbelief has surely strayed from the right path. So where's the disbelief? So you have the opportunity to believe in the Prophet Muhammad. If you start questioning him and arguing with him and saying, we don't want to follow what you're saying, and what you're saying, we don't like what you're saying, then that's pretty much disbelief. If you question the Prophet, this is very significant. If you're going to question the Prophet and you hear the Prophet taught something, you're like, well, I don't accept that. Okay, that's the problem. Now, if you don't accept the hadith, okay, it's different than you not accepting something that the Prophet's saying. Why? Because hadith have different gradings. So if you're not accepting a hadith and you're saying, well, that's a weak hadith and I'm not sure if the Prophet really said that and something doesn't seem right to me, that's in a different category. Your issue is with the narration. If something the Prophet is clearly saying, imagine you were there, 100%, this is like the most authentic hadith you can ever hear. You're right there, you're listening to what he's saying. And then you're questioning it. You're like, well, why do I have to do it? I don't want to follow what you have to say. That is disbelief, right? Rejecting the Prophet or rejecting anything the Prophet said is disbelief. Rejecting anything that Allah has said in the Qur'an, even one verse. I usually ask my kids' class all the time. I'm like, what if you just don't follow? What if you just reject one verse in the Quran? Just one. You have 99.9% belief. Can you still be a Muslim? No, you can't. Why? Because if you believe this is from Allah, how can you reject part of what Allah is saying? Something's not right, right? So you're supposed to believe in the entire thing. Otherwise, what's it between 99%, 70%, 30%, 5%? What is it like, I'm a 97.3% Muslim. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. So when it comes to this, it's something that you're supposed to believe entirely. So the same thing here. Don't question your Prophet because it's like a type of disbelief. وَدَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَوْ يَرُدُّونَكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِكُمْ كُفَّارًا حَسَدًا مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِهِمْ. So he says, many of the people of the book, meaning Jews and Christians, they wish that they could turn you back to disbelief. Meaning you Muslims, they hope that they could turn you back to disbelief after you have believed. Why? Just out of envy on their part. Now, wait a minute. It's talking about the Muslims. And the overwhelming majority of Muslims were what religion before Islam? Idol worshippers. So they worship idols. You say, well, wait a minute. Who's closer to the true religion? The people of the book or the idol worshippers? The people of the book. So the people of the book, at least they believe in one God, or even with the Trinity, they believe in God, they believe in a creator, they believe in the prophets, they believe that there's books, even though there's some corruption in the books. At least they believe in these things as a principle. They believe in angels, they believe in many of the things that Islam teaches, because they originally came from correct prophets. But now they hope that you would turn back to disbelief and go back to your idol worship. Wait, how in the world could that be? How could somebody who's closer to you say, we'd rather you go back all the way to worshiping idols? Not even, you're better off worshiping idols than with this new religion of Islam. Why would you say something like that when you believe that's even further from the truth? Well, then Allah explains. He said it's hasad, it's envy, it's jealousy. It's just jealousy on their part, because they recognize in the back of their mind, they say, you know what, now you guys have like an edge over us. And you guys are so close. Even if they don't believe 100% that even Islam is true, you're too close to the truth. Better you be further away from the truth. Because now when you're too close to the truth, now there's competition. And now we have a problem. We don't want any competition, right? So just out of envy on their part, they're going, and this is basically Allah is criticizing them. So how can you guys prefer idolatry over at least some type of monotheism? You guys would prefer that these people go back to idolatry because there's a hatred and jealousy in your heart. Even after the truth has been made clear to them. Meaning they know what is true and what is not true. So forgive them, meaning forgive them for now, and leave them alone until Allah gives the order. Meaning until Allah tells you to do something differently about their behavior. This is a very important principle, is that sometimes there are troublemakers. Sometimes there are people who are harassing you. Sometimes there are people who are fighting against you. And it's not always the wisest thing and the right thing to respond immediately, to respond instantly and be like, you know what, we got to do something about these people. So Allah is teaching a very clear principle. It's like right now, these people are bothering you, they're disturbing you, they're doing all of these things, they prefer you go back to idol worship. Just forgive them, and forgive them means like forgive them outwardly, like just leave them alone, right? And just move on and don't deal with them, right? Maybe they'll have another, they'll give them a few more chances or whatever it is, but then there's going to be a time to respond. This doesn't mean that you always just pass off and anyone is insulting you and making fun of you, you just keep on forgiving and forgiving. No, there's a limit. So there's a restriction. So now there's a time where you're patient. And he's saying there, and there's a foreshadowing. Allah is basically giving that, you know what, there's going to come a time soon where now Allah is going to give a different command. He's gonna tell you that, you know what, okay, the time for being patient and just dealing with all of the problems that these people are giving you, that time is over. And now it's time to do something. And that means it's gonna come soon. But now is not that time. And that's very difficult for a lot of people to do. Right? When it comes to some individuals, it's better that you just ignore them for a while, depending on your situation. The situation here called for leaving these people alone. Sometimes a situation, somebody's a nuisance, somebody's, saying a bunch of stuff, they're not worth addressing. Maybe it's not worth your time. Maybe it's not going to result in much benefit if you address the people. And there are some people who are worth addressing. So some groups should be neglected and they should just be avoided for a time being. And some individuals should be avoided for a time being, even though you may feel tempted to respond. Right? And this shows you the wisdom that Allah has. Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir. Allah has control over everything. So meaning that Allah can change the circumstances whenever He wants. But when Allah decides, these people who are harassing you and they're trying to get the upper hand on you and they're doing all these things, Allah can change their situation completely. So just be patient. Allah is going to handle this one for you, and He's going to tell you what to do when the time comes. Right? And also, what's interesting, it's basically saying, hatta, meaning until the command of Allah comes. So this is one rule, be patient right now, but a new rule is going to come. What have we just seen? One verse comes, another verse is going to come to replace it and to override it, because this was meant to be temporary. So demonstrating the exact same principle that Allah just mentioned previously. Next verse. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Establish the prayer and give the mandatory charity. Right? So we've seen this verse before, but what it's also saying is that, you know what happens with a lot of people is that if they're being patient, they're like, don't respond to this group of people, don't respond to this person. Be like, but I just got to do something. You want something to do? Okay, pray and give charity. Do some good deeds to keep yourself occupied. It'll keep you busy. Because what happens, they say, like a idle mind or idle hands or whatever, the devil's playground, right? So you need to keep yourself busy if you're going to sit there and be patient. If you're not busy and your mind is wandering and you're just doing nothing, all you're going to think about is the things that you start obsessing over, and that may be responding or retaliating to people that are causing you a problem. وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ تَجِدُوهُ عِندَ اللَّهِ. Any good you send out for yourselves, you will find it with Allah. Meaning, you will find the reward of that with Allah. And I mentioned this instant karma in this world, mentality that some people have. This is generally not the case of a believer. Sometimes goodness will come your way in the world, but we don't do things with expectation that it's just going to come back to you in this world. A lot of self-help books, they teach you that too. It's like, you do this and it will guarantee it's going to come back into you in this life. Well, first of all, getting it back in this life, is that the best thing anyways? It's probably not the best thing. Later on, you may be like, man, I wish I would have just had it over there. And number two, that's not what Allah teaches for the most part. He tells you that you have to be patient because life is a test. You're not always going to reap up all the rewards in this life. So whatever you send out for yourselves, like the prayer and like the charity and all the other good things that you're doing, occupy your mind, so you're not dealing with these other people, you're going to get all of that with Allah. So you don't have to worry about it. You're sending all of this stuff for your own good. Inna Allah bima ta'amaluna basir. Allah sees whatever you do. Meaning Allah is aware of all the good things that you're doing, so you don't have to worry about it. And you never have to worry about somebody else recognizing. This is one of the challenges of today. This is one of the weaknesses within human beings. It's like when somebody does something good, you feel good to get recognized, right? Like somebody comes and thanks you, somebody says, good job. Somebody, work for an organization, they give you an award, you feel good and you're like, this person recognized me. Because the opposite is, they don't even appreciate me, they don't even care for me or whatever it is. At the end of the day, ideally, the believer should always remember that Allah knows whatever you're doing. Allah sees whatever you're doing. That's good and bad. And if He sees the good, your reward is going to be with Allah. So it's somewhat of a natural weakness that we need to find recognition and appreciation with other people. Now this, you have to apply this differently, whether you're on the giving end or the receiving end. So when you're on the receiving end, you have to remember that Allah knows everything and Allah sees everything, and you don't put your expectations so high and say, you know what, no one's even seeing what I'm doing and I'm doing all this good and no one even knows, all this private stuff that I'm doing. You have to remind yourself that Allah knows. That's on the receiving end. And if you're on the giving end, you also have to realize that humans are weak by nature, and people naturally have this tendency to have some level of appreciation, not necessarily showing off, but at some level of appreciation. It's not against Islam. In fact, it's thanking the people for something. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, whoever does not thank the people does not thank Allah. So thanking them for something is actually something which is a good thing, because that's naturally what makes people happy and something that they like and they appreciate, as long as it's not done in excess. So you should always try to focus on being one of those people who appreciates others and who thanks others. But if you're falling into the mentality and saying, people don't appreciate me, and where's my award, and where's my recognition, that's when you have to remind yourself, Allah sees everything. I don't need to sit here and focus on all of those things. Next verse. وَقَالُوا لَن يَدْخُلَ الْجَنَّةَ إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ هُودًا أَوْ نَصَارَى. They say no one can enter paradise unless they are a Jew or a Christian. So basically they're saying, this is their idea that nobody can get into paradise. Remember we saw the previous verse says that the Jews say that they're on the right religion, and the Christians say that they're on the right religion. Actually, do we see that verse? No, we didn't. Sorry, that's coming in 2 more verses. All right. So they're saying, meaning the people of the book, saying no one can enter into paradise unless you follow this religion. So what's the response? The response is, Tilka amaniyuhum. Those are their baseless desires. So they hope and they wish that, paradise for the Jews, it's restricted for the Jews. Paradise for the Christian, you have to believe that Jesus is your savior, that he died on the cross for your sins, and that's you need to go to paradise, so you have to be a Christian. The response from Allah, those are what they want. That's what they want. But what's the response? A beautiful response. قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So tell them, Prophet, present your evidence if you're telling the truth. Because you need to have evidence of that. There should be clear-cut evidence of that somewhere. So saying, at least show me the evidence, even from your own scriptures. So where is the evidence that in Judaism, it says that only Jews can enter into paradise? And I quoted for you the Jewish encyclopedia before, right? But I couldn't quote a verse from the Torah telling you that. So why the Jewish encyclopedia? The Jewish encyclopedia explains these are the beliefs of the Jews based on the Torah, based on the other teachings, based on the Talmud, based upon the rabbis' commentaries. And this was a commonly held belief throughout their history. But do you find any clear-cut verses saying that in the Torah? No, you don't. So you say, well, where's the proof? And you say the same thing when it comes to the Gospels. Where did it say that Jesus said that he's going to die on the cross and you must believe in him in order to get to paradise? That wasn't what he taught. If you look at his Sermon on the Mount, if you look at all of the other teachings that you find throughout throughout the Gospels, even the Gospels that we have with us today, you don't find that teaching. This is one of the beautiful things about Islam. It's one of the most powerful things about Islam is that it talks about evidence and proof. And that's something that, a lot of people, sometimes we take for granted as Muslims. We're like, proof, evidence, this is all beautiful. But the other religions, it's all about you have an experience, or you have a dream, or you have a leap of faith, or you just want to be part of a community. It's not about reflection. It's not about rationality. It's not about evidence. It's not about that. It's more just feeling based. And I was literally just talking to a lady last night about this. She called me. Long story, very interesting story. But, she was saying that she's not sure if she wants to become Muslim or she's going to become Muslim or not. And she's like, one of the things that's really, she's like, rationally, I'm kind of inclining towards Islam. And it makes sense to me. But, spiritually, I've had like these spiritual experiences and like these emotional experiences which are attaching me to my other religion. So I'm not sure if I should leave that. And I say, well, have you ever had an spiritual experience, which also attaches you towards Islam? So yes, I had 2 contradictory spiritual experiences. One is telling me to go towards Christianity, and one is telling me to go towards Islam. And she's like, rationally, it's kind of like towards Islam, but these 2 spiritual, I don't know how am I supposed to reconcile between these 2 spiritual experiences? I'm so torn. I said, well, when you have contradictory spiritual experiences, you realize, and she also has some mental illness and all that. But I said, this is based on your emotions. And what you need to do is you need to transcend your emotions and go with something that is rational. Why? Because if God was going to send a message to people about what the true religion is, it should be universal by definition, because that would be fair. And if it's going to be fair, what do people equally have across the board? They have the mind to think with. That's what not everyone thinks properly. Like they say, common sense is not that common, unfortunately, but they have the capacity. They have the potential to think properly, right, in general. But not everyone has the capacity and the potential to have emotional, spiritual experiences, out-of-body experiences, certain types of dreams and all that. So how can the truth be based in something that is more relative and subjective than something that is objective and absolute? So that's the beautiful thing about Islam. Hopefully she'll accept Islam soon, inshallah. So that is pretty much what Islam is saying. And this is kind of what this verse is saying. You need to present evidence. You can't just make claims without evidence. You need to back it up with evidence. It's not about how you feel. It's not about amani. It's not about your desires and what you want. It has to be backed up with something. And then verse 112. بَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ فَلَهُ أَجْرُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ. Allah says, no way. What you just said in the previous verse, nobody can enter paradise except Jews and Christians. There's no way. The reality is, whoever submits themselves to Allah and does good will have their reward with their Lord. So it's very clear. And if you look at the wording here, man aslama wajhahu. Whoever submits, wajhahu actually means their face. But face, in Arabic, implies the most important part of a person, and therefore it's referring to the entire person. Even when you say like the face of Allah, it's referring to Allah as a whole. So he's saying whoever submits, and the word aslama comes from the word aslama yuslimu, Islam. Meaning whoever has Islam, because Islam means to submit or to surrender. So it's actually putting in there, but it's using it as a verb rather than as like an identifier. Saying whoever submits themselves completely to Allah and they're doing good, meaning they're believing and they're doing all the good that they're supposed to be doing, they're going to have the reward with their Lord on the Day of Judgment. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They will have no fear, nor will they be sad, meaning on the Day of Judgment. But it's saying that the criteria is not about identity. This is what it's saying. The previous verse said, you have to be a Jew, and if you say in English, with a capital J, and you have to be a Christian with the capital C in order to get into paradise. And that's an identity marker. They're not saying you have to be a follower of the true teachings of Prophet Moses. That's generally not how they say it. You have to be a follower of the true teachings of Prophet Jesus. That's generally not how they say it. You should become a Jew or you should become a Christian. And it's become an identity marker by that time, even though that's not necessarily representative of the true teachings of these prophets. Allah is saying, whoa, take one step back. These are these identity markers that you guys have made, and you need to zoom out and say, no, the true religion that Allah sent is universal in terms of people, in terms of space, in terms of like in one time, space, and it's universal in terms of time. So meaning the religion of all the prophets throughout history has been Islam. And the religion of all people, that what they should be following, if they're doing the submitting themselves and doing good, that's going to be the religion of Islam. Submitting themselves the way that Allah wants them to and doing good, that is the religion of Islam. And that's why Islam is not named after anyone. See, the word Jew says, Jew or Christian. The word Jew comes from the word Judah, tribe of Judah. It's a place, right? So it's a tribe turned into a place, a particular region. And then the name is restricted, like the name itself is talking about a particular thing. Christian comes from Christ, from Jesus. And this was not Jesus' last name, by the way. Some people are like, oh, Jesus' first name, Christ, last name. No, it's not. There were no first name and last name. It's a modern thing. So Jesus was his name. Jesus, the son of Mary. But Christ from Christos, which is Greek, which means the anointed one or the Messiah, al-Masih, which is going to come in the Qur'an. So this was his description. So it's saying this is the religion of Jesus. See, but what was the religion of Prophet Musa? I mean, he didn't believe in Jesus. He couldn't have been a Christian. So how could this be universal? These are all identity markers. So what's happening is basically Allah is saying Islam is universal of time and space. You cannot sit there and say it's only belongs to this particular group or this particular group and these new identity markers that you formulated. As long as you believe in what Allah wants you to believe at the time He wants you to believe it, and you do the right things, you're good. So now it's setting the transition from the previous communities and saying you're being replaced by a new community because you were supposed to represent Islam and you turned into Jews and Christians. You were supposed to be the Muslims of the previous community. Now we're going to replace you with people who are going to, or who are supposed to follow the true religion, right? And some of them, and this has been warned by the Prophet, some of them, they're going to copy in your footsteps and do the exact same stuff that you were doing, right? So we need to be careful. So we'll stop there and open it up for questions. Yes.
Some of the areas where the Lord refers to them in their role, because obviously the Christians call themselves Christians, but I don't think that necessarily is appropriate.
No, the word Christian was not mentioned yeah, Jesus never used the word Christian. Exactly.
What does it refer to them? The scripture, but what does it refer to? Their own folk, or your people, or you, how are they?
Yeah, I don't remember the wording that's used, but there's not one word that was actually used by the Prophet to refer to that particular community, right? All right, so they weren't labeled by the prophets. Yeah.
Bring it to an okay.
Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Aslama yuslimu means free? No. No, it does not. Where did you read that? Correct. No. No. You got that from my class or you read it somewhere else? Oh, okay. Hmm. 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 Interesting. I would like to look up which website you found that on. But Aslama Yuslimu Islam does not mean, no, it does not mean. Okay. Okay. Well, so your dad is not named after the verb, by the way. So Aslama is a verb. And people's names are not named after the verb. So it's a noun, right? So it has a different, it's going to have some level of different meaning. But at the same time, the verb itself, aslama, does not mean free. It means to surrender or to submit. Okay. No. So how do you reconcile between qadr, like divine decree, and over superseding a verse, so, or overriding a verse? So without getting into the incident, because it's disputed about how to interpret that, just looking at it from this perspective, whenever you're talking about qadr or divine decree, you only focus on the past and you don't focus on the future, right? So in terms of divine decree, didn't Allah know that he was putting this first rule as temporary and he knew that another rule was going to supersede it? Yes, he did. Did other people know? They didn't know. So in terms of the knowledge of Allah, there's no contradiction. The problem is when people don't know. It's like even when it comes to like a government, if they enact a temporary law and another law is coming and they don't have knowledge about it, that doesn't affect decree in any way, shape, or form. Sisters, no sisters. Okay. Take two more questions and then we got to call Adhan. Right. Yes. Ali. You got to speak louder because some people are talking over here. Did the Christians at the time believe in Muhammad? No, most of them did not. Some of them did, but most of them did not. Okay, last question. Yeah. Is that what? Oh yeah, so yes. So the question is when it said be patient and then a new command is going to come, right? Does that apply to us today? Yes, absolutely. He gives us a general principle. So again, no command from Allah is going to come and be like, here, now do something, right? But it teaches you that there's a time to wait and there's a time to respond. So what you do is if you look at the circumstances they were in and you say, well, why were they told to wait? And then you see the command that comes next and you say, well, why were they told to respond? And you analyze it, you say, well, which circumstance do we look like we're in? If we're in this one, then we're going to be like this. And if we're in this one, then we're going to be like this. So both circumstances could apply to us differently at different points in our lives. Okay, inshallah, we'll end it at that. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum.